Hi, everyone, and welcome to one of the week 2 lectures. Glad to see you back. I want to begin with a couple of announcements. I see a lot of you have been posting on the discussion boards. I'm actually recording this in the middle of week 1, so I know some of you are still working through the assignments. I want to make sure to mention what I'm expecting from you on the discussion boards. Make sure that you're always responding to the appropriate number of responses. Usually it's going to be 1 to 2. It's going to vary depending on, what the topic is, how involved it is. And also make sure that if I'm commenting on something that you're letting me know that you've read it or that you're acknowledging it. You can also feel free to disagree as long as you back it up with facts from somewhere. A lot of times I'm just going to be asking questions or asking you if you've thought about it this way or how does it relate to another classmates' response. So I really want to encourage you to get out on the discussion boards and make the most of interacting with your classmates and myself as well. You, of course, do not have to respond to the comments that I left on your introductions. I just wanted to read about your backgrounds, what you're familiar with, because it really helps us pace the course. And, of course, you know that there's undergraduate and there are graduate students in this course, which is why you'll always see COM 350 and 525. So there are slightly different requirements for each course. You'll see that the graduate students have to do an annotated bibliography project that the undergraduate students do not have to do. But really, I want to make sure that we're all interacting together. We all have things that we can learn from one another. So with that, I'm going to start into this week's lecture. And for this week, you had to read chapter 2 from Shriver's book. I put a picture of the book here. It just helps to visualize what the book is, and you can tell by the cover that it's a little bit older, from the 90s. So it's Dynamics of Document Design, and that's by, of course, Karen Shriver. I also included a footnote at the bottom here with a link to a video lecture that I found from Karen Shriver. It's definitely not required. If it's something that you're interested in and you're possibly thinking of using it for one of your projects this term, you can definitely feel free to check it out. I will say it starts in another language and then it goes to English once Karen Shriver is speaking. So we want to start out with talking about the 3 traditions of the 20th century. Now, those would be craft, romantic, and rhetoric. You're going to remember rhetoric from last week's lecture, of course. And these 3 different traditions that Shriver goes over, they're helpful for both writers and users to give us 3 different ways to approach document design. And these are things that we should be using to approach document design. Now, as you go through the term more, you might develop your own ideas. For me, I think that you need all of these areas to be an effective communicator, but you may, as you continue in your work, decide that, I don't really see much help from the romantic tradition. That's completely fair. I want you to really look at these and decide what works for you. What do you think still works now that we're in 2018? So really feel free to explore them and express what your own opinions are as well. Now, these 3 traditions each have their own beliefs, and they come from different theories. If you remember from last week's lecture, I mentioned that in the 50s and 60s, that's when the field really starts emerging, and these different periods of time are really going to impact the theories behind each one of these traditions. So I want to start out with the craft tradition, and the craft tradition basically says that if I can produce guidelines, rules, or procedures and create modes and models for someone else to follow, they can be an effective communicator. So I'm almost setting up a format for you to follow. You're doing exactly as I say. The document's going to be effective. Now, you might think of an example for this as teaching someone how to write a term paper for the first time, or maybe how to write a compare and contrast article. Another example might be teaching someone how to edit. I can teach you grammar skills, I can teach you punctuation, but does that necessarily create an effective editor? According to the craft tradition, it does. It basically means that I can teach you anything that you need to know. Once you learn it, your document's going to be effective. Now, going on the opposite hand, we then have the Romantic tradition, which really says that you can't teach writing and design, that it's something that is just inside you. And this becomes problematic because what do you do if you don't have that inner sense for writing or the inner sense for document design? It really relies on the intuition of the writer rather than something that can be taught to someone. So if someone is lacking that, you just can't be an effective communicator. Now, that's going to lead us into the rhetorical tradition. Again, we talked about this a lot in the first week when we spoke about Aristotle. Think about the art of persuasion again. And this really involves finding means of persuasion, and it really focuses on the belief that all communications are arguments. Basically, whatever you're writing, you're trying to persuade that audience to align with what you want. You're trying to accomplish a goal. You want the audience to agree with you. So think of something like even a job application. You usually have to write a little essay or about why you want the job. Something like that is still an argument. You're saying that you want the job. This is why you should get it over other people. And you're trying to persuade someone, the audience, which is usually your hiring manager. You could also think of a term paper. Again, you're trying to persuade the professor to believe what you wrote. You want to try to prove your thesis, and you're lining up the facts. That's something that you're relying on rhetoric to be able to persuade that person. Now, I want to focus on something that Shriver says in her book, and for this, to make sure I get it right, I'm going to read this off the paper. Rhetorical tradition provides what Shriver calls, and this is quote, a rich theoretical framework for thinking about complex relationships among the communicator, the audience, the words, the pictures, and the context. And that's on page 58 if you happen to have the chapter open. And so this means that we need to be highly sensitive to the audience. We need to consider all these other aspects that maybe Romantic wasn't considering. Romantic, we're creating the audience. We're not looking at possibly a realistic audience, certainly not getting user feedback from them. But rhetoric, we're really looking at what the audience needs. Who is the audience? What are they doing with the document? How are they going to be using that in the future? And these are all things that need to be considered. Now, talking about traditions, if you go with one tradition alone, I think you can see that it's a little bit limiting. If I go purely with Romantic, I'm just saying the person is creative. If you're not a creative writer or someone that has an eye for document design by nature, then you're not going to be able to accomplish this. With craft, we're saying if I give you these rules, the document is going to be a success, and anyone that can learn it can be an effective communicator. You're going to see some problems with that in the future. And then rhetoric, obviously we've talked about that a lot. We're saying here that everything is some sort of persuasion, and they're really wanting you to focus on the audience and what the audience needs. And we're focusing really on, in this case, not winning an argument, but getting the audience where we need them to be. That is understanding the content that we're teaching. Now, I think that it's really more important as a technical communicator not to just focus on one of these areas, but to have all these tools that you can put in your toolbox. You may have seen me comment on a few of the introductions that some of you have a lot of experience in this field already, and that is great. That's certainly wonderful. But there are also other tools that you might find throughout this course that you can use in your toolbox. When you get into your professional work, you might be working with a lot of style guides. You might be tasked to create a new style guide for your company. So these are all things that you can pull back on and pull out when you need them. It's not really correct to say that the Romantic movement replaced or directly followed the craft movement. It really came about because English departments at universities realized that there's got to be a more appropriate way to teach writing. So you see the teacher emerge as more of a guide whose job it is to release the creativity of that writer. So with this, you're going to see creative writing programs popping up across the United States. You may remember from my own introduction that I said I hold a creative writing BA and that my master's is in technical communication. You may find that throughout your studies. You may see people in technical writing positions that are from more of a creative writing background or from a literary background. That's not abnormal. And from this, once we get past a little bit of the creative writing, we start to realize that we need the professional writing and we need the document design, and those start to emerge. And Shriver goes through some of the organizations that start to pop up. One she mentions is the Society for Technical Communication. So I wanted to make sure I gave you guys a couple of three local to Philadelphia organizations. I know some of you are remote or might be in New Jersey and it's a little too far for you, but definitely if you're in the Philadelphia area, you can check these out, or if you're remote, you can also check them out just on their websites. So first we have STCPMC, which is the Philadelphia Metro chapter of the Society for Technical Communication. I know they've held events at Drexel in the past. Events are always in and around Philadelphia. Next, we have Philly Chi. The Chi part is computer-human interaction. This is definitely more of a focus on the UX aspect. So if you're interested more in how users are interacting with documents, or not covered in this class, but also interesting programs, you can also check out their meetings. And the last one I have on the list is PANMA. I believe it's Philadelphia Arts and New Media Association. I could be wrong on one of those acronym letters, but they regularly meet at Wharton School of Business, and as a bonus, they always have pizza at their meetings. So even if you don't like the event or the speaker after you're done, you still get some pizza. So those are definitely worth checking out if you're in the Philadelphia area and you're interested in any of those fields. Now, Shriver also goes into studies that are being done at the Doc Design Center in Washington, D.C., and the Communication Design Center at Carnegie Mellon. And what those centers start doing at that time is looking at real users using real documents in real time. So they're actually moving to study real people. Now, studies vary. Shriver gives a lot of examples of them. How headers impact documents. How important is that? How users read computer manuals. At the time, computer manuals were in print form before that. Are users really reading the full manual? Probably not. So what information, or how do we design a document to deliver the information that the computer manual does at a higher level? And then we also have methods for writers to increase their sensitivity to the reader, and that one struck me as interesting because I think it ties in a little bit with not just the romantic idea, just because when it's the romantic tradition, you're kind of creating the audience. So if the person was a bit more sensitive to the audience, maybe they can craft a better audience in their mind. So there's this timeline that Shriver is establishing, and it's worth to go back and look at again to see when traditions come about, when there are serious changes, what studies are impacting the field. It's definitely a place to start if you're still looking for topics for future projects in this course. Definitely take another look and see if anything stands out to you as interesting. And that's going to conclude the lecture for this week. There's going to be another part, so make sure you're watching both parts. I believe I'm going to list this as part number 1. We're actually getting close to our 15-minute cutoff here, so I'm going to end it and continue on to the next lecture. Thanks, everyone.